From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Sitting in tonight, 2020 correspondent Tom Gerald.
Good evening. For months now, organized crime in this country has been on the run. Government prosecutors have brought one case after another against the mob and have won them all until today. In Brooklyn, New York this afternoon, John Gotti, reputed to be one of the nation's leading organized crime figures, was acquitted on racketeering charges, and so were 6 of his associates. It was a stunning setback for the government. Here's ABC's Richard Threlkill.
He wears $1,800 suits. He's chauffeured around in a Mercedes, and when somebody asked his wife what he does for a living, she said he provides. For the last 7 months, John Gotti's been going in and out of federal court in New York City, where he's been on trial on charges of racketeering and conspiracy, because the feds charged what he is head of the Gambino crime family, and what he's been doing for years are things like hijacking armored cars and murdering fellow mobsters. The feds have been on something of a roll lately with the mafia. Last November, they convicted the reputed bosses of 3 other crime families.
This is a great day for law enforcement, but this is a bad day, probably the worst, for the mafia.
And earlier this month, they convicted 17 other mobsters of running a dope ring in the so-called Pizza Connection case. This afternoon, though, the jury decided the feds had not made their case against John Gotti, despite all the high-tech surveillance the feds had done on him. He was found not guilty and promptly stood up in court and shouted at his prosecutors, "Shame on you." His lawyer said Gotti had already served prison time for some of the charges and was innocent of the others.
John Gotti and 6 other co-defendants were not guilty. They should never have been brought to this courtroom to begin with in the first place.
The prosecutors were, well, subdued.
I have no idea what went on within the jury room or how they proceeded. Obviously, they perceived that there was something wrong with our evidence. The case was harshly and hardly fought by both sides, and the jury has spoken. That's the end of the case.
It may be sour grapes, but the feds are murmuring that they're not finished with John Gotti. For now, at least, he's free to go home and resume whatever it is he does for a living. Richard Threlkill, ABC News, New York.